intelligencesquared.com.
Professor of European Studies at Oxford University, spends time at Stanford each year, author of Facts Are Subversive, historian of the present. Tim Garton, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nick. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Hannan actually blogged about this debate before coming here, and he spoke of the tremendous dignity of the Élysée that hangs around President Giscard d'Estaing and says, but he can never look at him without thinking of a line of Mallarmé. I quote, si extraordinairement distingué, quand je lui dis bonjour, je me fais toujours l'effet de lui dire merde. When I say, what do I need to translate? When I say good day to him, I have the effect of saying mad. And I do feel that in the way Daniel Hannan and many Eurosceptics make the argument, there is always something of the little boy who is tempted to shout mad at the grown-ups and then run off into the bushes. In the case of Daniel Hannan, then to go into the pub garden and start throwing sticks at an Aunt Sally which he himself has erected. Because, of course, what you're being confronted with here is an Aunt Sally, a straw man, which is this idea that what we're talking about, the dream, is the United States of Europe, a European superstate, super-centralized, crushing all diversity. Although, by the way, the idea that communist China is a model of decentralization and freedom is a curious one, robbed of democracy, or in the case of Oliver Kamm, that we're talking about the problems of the Eurozone. Ladies and gentlemen, it's very interesting, the rather glorious disarray of the proposers of this motion, who cannot even agree what it's about. It is about none of these things, ladies and gentlemen. As the President pointed out, there is a question on the exam paper, a motion, and the motion reads, Germany no longer needs Europe. That is the proposition on which you have to make up your minds. Now, it is clearly the case that Germany no longer needs Europe in the way that it did until the 3rd of October 1990, when it was reunited. Until then, it needed to rehabilitate itself, to win the trust and support of its European neighbors. Mission accomplished. It's clearly the case that German public opinion has become more critical and more skeptical, more British, as Michael Sturmer said. It's clearly the case that the Germans have become more comfortable with nationhood, with patriotism, with defining their own national interests, and asking what is Europe good for. That's all absolutely fine. That's a good thing. The question is, when you do that, critically and frankly, what answer do you come up with? Now, I don't think that any intelligent, serious, well-informed person faced with the question or the proposition, Germany no longer needs Europe, could possibly agree. And since I see here before me a room full of nothing but intelligent, serious, well-informed men and women, I'm sure you will agree. But just in case you need a few more arguments to support what you're already convinced of, let me just give you three very briefly. They've all been made in some form by two co-opposers. Germany benefits hugely economically from the European market, from the European Union, from the single market. 60% of its exports still go to the EU, even if that comes down because of exports to the BRICS, it's still hugely important. It's immensely successful in exporting in the Eurozone. It gets the possibility of cheap labor production in East Central Europe due to EU enlargement. So your Volkswagen or Skoda is made in the Czech Republic or Poland and then exported outside the EU. The euro has actually been a huge asset. And by the way, as the President said, if Germany did leave the euro and got back the Deutschmark, what would happen? The Deutschmark would go up through the roof, like the Swiss franc, and even Mercedes would find it more difficult to export. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't need to make the argument The proposer of the motion, Oliver Kamm, himself said, I quote, "Germany has been a huge beneficiary, economically, of the EU and the Eurozone." I rest my case. Secondly, the internal geopolitics of the European continent. Germany is the largest country in Europe, in the very middle, with more neighbors than anyone. That is the essence of what has been called for 200 years the German question. It persists as a question. This has nothing, and I say explicitly to Daniel Hannan, nothing to do with distrust of the current German leadership or the political system, which is excellent. It is simply a fact of geopolitics, of size, of wealth, of power, that Germany is there, this very big country with lots of small and medium-sized neighbors, and to manage that position, the European Union, a political community in which such relations are well managed, is the perfect answer. Henry Kissinger once said, Germany is too large for Europe, too small for the world. And to manage that position, the European Union is in the German interest, never mind anyone else's. Thirdly, the world we're in. You know, Daniel's visitor, extraplanetary visitor, was actually not so wrong. He just had to wait 500 years. Because the world we're in and are going to be in is one where emerging non-Western giants, the old giant Russia, the new giants China, India above all, China and India, Brazil, South Africa, not to mention the United States, are going to more and more be shaping the agenda of world politics. And even the largest European country, namely Germany, will soon be a dwarf by comparison with those giants in that world of giants. A world of giants which will be more like the 19th century Europe of competing sovereign nation-states, but on a global scale. Imagine in 20 years' time Germany having to negotiate on its own about trade with China, or intellectual property with China, or climate change with China. A giant dealing with a dwarf. All of us, including Germany, need the scale that only Europe can give. In a world of giants, you need to be a giant. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, if you want to vote for the motion, you have to be prepared to answer the question, should Germany leave the EU, with the answer yes, because that is the clear corollary of this motion. Are you prepared to do that? If not, reason, wisdom, intelligence, seriousness, profundity, wit, all point in the direction of voting against the motion. You have a choice. Either join the proposers, the Aunt Sally party, in going back to the 19th century, or join us in going forward into the 21st. Thank you very much.